Imagine you're flying alone over the waters of Australia's Bass Strait. All of a sudden, you spot something out of the ordinary. Strange, anomalous lights. Without notice, the lights descend upon you. Well, this is exactly what happened to 20-year-old Frederick Valentich. It was October 21st, 1978, and Frederick was participating in a routine training flight when he encountered the anomaly. His last recorded transmission is said to be filled with both fear and panic, and he utters the last words,
"It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft."
Shortly after this transmission, both Frederick and his Cessna 182L would vanish without a trace. Intensive searches only turned up more questions than answers. Everything seemed to point towards something out of this world. As the years have gone on, numerous theories have popped up trying to make sense of his disappearance. We're going to jump into some of those today, so stick around and try to help us figure it out. Frederick Valentich was a young, aspiring pilot with deep passion for aviation. On that fateful evening, he was supposed to embark on a journey from Moorabbin Airport in Victoria to King Island. This area is located off the southern coast of Australia. He planned his flight to leave at dusk and would fly off into the setting sun, slowly watching the light grow dimmer. It was said that the weather was clear, and Valentich was both competent and confident. But as he flew over the dark waters of the Bass Strait, all of that would change. Reports indicate that Valentich encounters an unidentified aerial phenomenon. It's about 45 minutes into his flight when the objects appear above him. Both startling and concerning. Not only is what happened to Frederick Valentich both unexplained, it seems to defy all earthly logic. There's been no official explanation as to what possibly could have happened or any evidence found that he actually crashed that night. Was his disappearance part of a tragic accident, or did he encounter something supernatural? In this episode, we're going to explore the details of his last moments, the investigation of his disappearance, and the emergent theories that try to make sense of something that seems completely senseless. Evening of October 21st, 1978, Frederick is ready for his training flight. He taxied his aircraft onto the runway and performs his pre-flight checks with the precision of a young pilot eager to take to the sky. At 6:19 p.m., he takes off heading southwest towards Cape Opry, reaching a height of 4,500 feet. As Valentich cruised over the darkening waters of the Bass Strait, the flight seemed routine. He radioed in his regular checks and locations as he watched the last signs of the sun fade away behind the horizon. The Cessna hummed along smoothly, its instruments steady as Valentich navigated the Bass Strait below. Minutes would pass, and Valentich would adjust his course slightly to account for shifting and changing flight. His entire life would change in a split second, as a long metallic object suddenly appeared above and in front of him. It wasn't behaving like any aircraft he's ever seen. At first, it was moving erratically, defying all the laws of physics, and then coming to a complete standstill and hovering. As it began to emit light, Valentich thought it may be a landing aircraft. Not long after the original sighting, his curiosity began to descend into fear as he realized this thing wasn't like anything humans could have created. This is when he reached for his radio and he says to Melbourne, "Is there any known air traffic below 5,000 feet? Which reply, no. Leading up to Valentich's last transmission, as the fear and panic began to grow in his voice, he had to have known something was wrong. I couldn't imagine being in that situation, seeing something not only your brain can't comprehend, but feeling completely helpless, knowing that this thing can do whatever it wants to. Military or not, I don't think it really mattered at that point, because if there's anything I've learned, planes don't just disappear. As those seconds kind of turn into endless void of him vanishing into the night, I can't help but think how fucking terrifying that must have been. There has to be more to the story. It can't just be another case of a plane disappearing, especially reporting those anomalous lights. And the one thing that's really interesting is the radar tower this day hasn't really said they picked up or confirmed that they were able to see anything at radar during this time. As we've seen a lot of different theories and speculations about what happened to him, maybe it does. As you can imagine, when you get a story like this, there's not a lot of answers. Yeah, so delete. When you get a case like this, there's definitely not a lot of answers. It happened not only so quickly, it happened over the middle of the ocean. Literally, there's never been people of this guy's wreckage found. And it boggles my mind to this day because it's pretty, like, despite how big the ocean is, it's still pretty hard to disappear. I mean, when machinery kind of breaks apart into the ocean, there's oil slicks and all kinds of things that float to the surface that you can usually pick up on. And it isn't easy by any means. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, but it seems to be something we're very capable as humans of doing, and there's been very few cases where planes have actually disappeared. When we don't have answers, all we have is speculation. So that's naturally what happens when the public starts to find out this. I think there's a lot of pain that his family and people that knew him probably went through at the time, because he said to have had kind of close-knit relationships. He was described super dedicated to becoming a pilot. At the time, he lived with his parents in Melbourne, and they were super supportive of his dreams. When Frederick vanished, it caused chaos and ripped a hole in his whole family's heart. His father, Guido, was particularly vocal in expressing belief that his crash could be tied to something paranormal. But the media, of course, latched onto it and turned this into your typical UFO spectacle, and it created a complete national frenzy. The Australian Department of Transport did an investigation into the matter and essentially ruled it as inconclusive, which further fueled public speculation and intrigue. As the story spread, it captivated not only the global UFO community, but also the aviation community. You get two components always with these cases, and one of them being, well, if it's not aliens, there was something there. We got to figure out what it was, because it could have just killed the guy. And then the second one being is like, well, it could be aliens, and if that's the case, well, it'd be kind of cool to still find them, wouldn't it? Anyhow, yeah, naturally this led to all kinds of theories and speculations into the case, and we're going to get into that. I'm also going to kind of dive into a little bit about the Australian Transportation Board's findings on the case, and, well, I'm not going to say findings, I'm going to say lack of findings, but they do offer a little bit of insight, which is always good, especially when it comes to kind of like pilot safety, aircraft condition, and also, I don't know, other cool pilot stuff. So at the time of his flight, this guy was built with a lot of enthusiasm. He was really excited about this. He was relatively inexperienced in terms of piloting aircraft. He only had 150 hours of flight time. So the area that Valentich was going to be flying to was actually known for somewhat difficult conditions due to the turbulent air and unpredictable weather patterns. Particularly when he left the airport, it was predicted to be clear, and it ends up being fairly stable weather. So Frederick Valentich piloted his Cessna 182L into the cold, vast expanse that night, expecting everything to just kind of be routine. Around 45 minutes into his flight, as he settled into his cruising altitude, Valentich radios traffic control.
Melbourne, this is Victor Hotel Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet?
The controller responded that there should be no traffic visible in the area, but Valentich says that he sees something unusual. He describes the object as both metallic and having a green light. At first he thought it might have been like landing lights from an aircraft, but radar tech even in the 70s was pretty good, so not only does air traffic control and that pilot have a good idea where things are supposed to be, the fact that nobody knows that this is there sets off all kinds of alarm bells for Frederick. It didn't belong. Something that was supposed to be there. Anomalous. It wasn't a plane, at least not any aircraft that he's ever seen in his life before. The object moved erratically, dancing around with an eerie precision that defied all the laws of physics. So pilots are trained how to not only spot things in the sky, identify what they are, and kind of what their relative speed is, because it's really important. I don't think in 1978 there was like a collision avoidance system in those planes, probably not in a small plane nowadays anyway, but they were definitely trained how to navigate, like by the landmark, stars, whatever, you name it, but also how to identify things that shouldn't be there, and how to kind of safely maneuver them, because it is a reality for most pilots. There's lots of stuff in the sky that's not supposed to be there. Some of it's not aliens. We're talking like weather balloons, kites. I don't know if you remember people freaking out in like Los Angeles when there was, I want to say it was like a Jack Skellington balloon that got loose and people thought it was like an alien floating around the city, things like that. There's a case of, there's Peel Region or Toronto police. They hit a small airplane with their drone fucking around, so it does happen. But he would be somewhat of a reliable witness or observer in this case, I would think, to kind of know that he was seeing something that didn't make sense. And when he's saying it's hovering and not moving, he's making that assessment based on professional training. Seconds after this encounter, that Valentich transmits that message that kind of sounds like fear and panic. Like, this thing's hovering, it's not an aircraft, and I think I'd be scared. The next few moments are filled with confusion for probably both him and the air traffic control, but we only get one side of the story, obviously. At the end of that panic transmission, Fred tries to get out words that sound like, my engine is sputtering. And to this day, it's never been really clear what he saw or exactly what was going down. But all that air traffic control did know is that he reported the problem and shortly after, completely. The search for Valentich begins immediately. Search and rescue is ripping out there by sea, by air, you name it. The search and rescue efforts seem to be completely fruitless. They look everywhere. There's not a single piece of wreckage, no sign of the aircraft anywhere. No debris. The thing that gets really weird is that it's not an incredibly huge area that they had to search. There should have been debris. There should have been oil slicks. There should have been something for the search and rescuers to pick up on, especially months out. And there's no sign. It's like he was teleported off the face of the earth. After initial days, weeks, turn into months, people really start to get confused because obviously it's not unheard of for it to take weeks, sometimes months to find a downed aircraft, but there's very few cases I can think of where you find something that's crashed. I think of, MH370, like there was a Canadian Pacific flight. I think it was a little bit more common back then, but still, it's pretty rare for that amount of time. So naturally, people started to speculate on the case, and a lot of rumors began to swirl around. The fingers were initially being pointed that maybe they were hit by a missile or some kind of military aircraft, and essentially this whole thing was kind of part of a cover-up. There's a ton of theories we're going to get into because there's other things that happen during the night of the flight or that come out that seriously don't boggle my mind. It makes me think that this could be one of the few cases where you have a UAP or UFO sighting that's verified by multiple witnesses and kind of ticks all those boxes, being fairly credible. Pilots see this stuff all the time. It's nothing new to them, but I'm sure for us land-loving Lamingtons, we think it was cool. All right, thanks again for joining us on this episode. As usual, I really appreciate you guys are here. I love these paranormal alien stuff, you know me, and I really want your thoughts in this case. So please comment at the end of this. Let me know what you think. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please do. And I'd really love if you guys could tell somebody about the channel. I need your help. Basically, aliens told me that they will abduct me and do experiments on me if I have less than 1,000 subscribers. So please subscribe and please prevent my abduction. Thank you. The number one theory put forward by everyone that we're going to tackle is alien abduction. Love to believe things in aliens and UFOs. This goes back to ancient histories. I mean, us in India or the Indians and texts, all these guys and these stories of little alien UFOs buzzing around the planet. And so it's no surprise that when he says he sees this unidentified aircraft right before he disappears, that people are going to link it to the 10,000 stories of the same thing happening over and over. It's not that crazy. I don't care what anyone. I think these things definitely exist. I really used to think these were probably ultra-terrestrials, being that they're some kind of higher dimension species from Earth, or maybe aliens. But more and more, I think it's probably related to at least a lot of the modern ones, experimental aircraft, things like that. It's just in 2021, when the government's kind of announced, we're going to do all this cool UFO disclosure, and we got nothing from it except more of the typical BS, blurry photos, things that didn't make sense. It seemed pretty apparent to me that we weren't going to get the answer. I don't think we will, at least in any meaningful way, until they come knocking on the door and say hey, we're here. On the night of the disappearance, it's reported that Frederick wasn't the only one to see this object. And when it's found out that essentially this farmer comes forward saying that he not only saw the plane, he actually saw the unusual lights in the same area right over the Bass Strait at the same time. These reports came from more than one person and more than one location, meaning that he wasn't the only one that saw this. It was described as having green lights and behaving erratically. This completely gave legs to the UFO theory, like, for sure, why wouldn't it? So Frederick's disappearance is not just a singular event, but one that drew significant public attention because of all the cooperating witnesses. One notable account came from a Southern Australia farmer who reported seeing the large bright lights hovering in the sky and what he believed to be a small aircraft attached to it. The farmer's account, although difficult to verify, added a layer of intrigue to the case. The media quickly came to interview this guy and say, hey, what's up? I think his name was George Padley. There doesn't seem to be any reason to doubt him. And another guy named Roy Manifold, an amateur photographer, was capturing a series of photos near the Bass Strait during the time of Frederick's disappearance. His photographs show an unexplained object moving across the sky. The problem with his account is that he doesn't notice this until after he develops photos and didn't see it during the time that it actually happened. So again, it looks pretty clear that there was something up there that night. And if you want to look on the screen, I can show you the photo. But seriously, I don't know. Now I've got a pilot. You got three people. You got three separate independent accounts. The UFO community investigated and corroborated that this fits the bill of a typical UFO abduction / encounter. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of people. Actually, I don't think there's really been too many people that have ever really contradicted that there was a UAP involved. This matches numerous accounts that other pilots have made over the years, as well as astronauts. It's not the only case of a pilot encountering a UAP and then disappearing. Example, 1953, the U.S. Air Force had a pilot named Felix Moncla who was out flying over Lake Superior. As he's flying over the lake and makes his report, vanishes into thin air. Another example also is in 1970, a Brazilian Air Force pilot reports that he encounters a cigar-shaped UFO while out on a training plane. When he encounters this UFO, he describes that he has intense disorientation and that his instruments and engines start to fail. And that's the thing, aliens or UAPs, it's not that crazy to think that advanced military aircraft have the ability to jam up your radar, instruments, God knows what, like an EMP, or if it's UAPs that have the ability to travel through time and dimensions and call alter gravity. I think they'd be able to fuck with the 1970s aircraft if they want. But primarily, the alien abduction theory becomes the main theory to describe his vanishing. Not the public, so does his family. There's no body, there's no aircraft. You have multiple witnesses seeing the UAP, and absolutely zero other explanation for it that seems to answer any of these questions. That being said, we're going to get into some of those theories just because I know there's a lot of skeptics out there and, maybe they're right. But the one thing with all the other theories, they don't have any cooperation. There's nothing else that really bolsters them other than, they seem like the more down-to-earth explanations. The theory that kind of seems to come, I would say most often from skeptics, is that Valentich experienced a case of complete spatial disorientation, which led to his fatal crash over the Bass Strait. Theory or not, spatial disorientation is a real problem for pilots, and it's something that happens in low visibility conditions. So think fog, or you're flying over large expanses like the ocean. Very common thing that pilots are trained to tackle. There's been commercial airline pilots that have been affected by this, where they start not trusting their gauges that tell them their winds are level.
It's really important to note that during the time of his disappearance, the Orionid meteor showers were peaking. So people are saying that it would have added to any disorientation where he was navigating over the strait.
What people are suggesting is that he was disoriented and he was actually off course and likely way too close to the ground and was seeing the lights of either street lights or meteors, something that was very real, and he just ended up changing course, crashing into the ocean to be found. It seems, to be honest, this plausible theory. If there wasn't other witnesses, and if there was evidence found of the crash, it would be almost unheard of in that situation, the spatial disorientation and him having communication up until his disappearance with aircraft control, that they wouldn't be able to find any evidence of his wreckage. Having that radio transmission right before his disappearance pretty much narrows down the area where I'm not saying he wasn't disoriented, it just doesn't seem to explain the crash in this case. I don't know, what do you think? Like, do you think it could have been something like a street light or some kind of disorientation where you thought maybe some traffic lights were a UAP and he crashes into the water beside some small little intersection? I don't know. That's not the end of the theories. The interesting thing, though, is like the official investigation by the Australian Department of Transport doesn't really blame it on this. It doesn't try to cite like, hey, this guy was disoriented at all. It just says it's inconclusive. No surprise. I mean, no airplane, I don't think it would have had a black guarantee a black box. Because it was the 70s and a small non-commercial aircraft like that. Doesn't mean it could or not. I don't know that. But they didn't find it, so it doesn't matter. And it does acknowledge in the official investigation that, yeah, like it could have been spatial disorientation, but we're never going to know. There's no evidence points one way or the other for us to make a decision. UAP, aircraft collision, like that kind of stuff, or otherwise. And from their perspective, there's no answer. It's an inconclusive determination, which does happen. I mean, these transportation agencies are typically focused on safety, so they're not like police who are trying to investigate a crime and get an answer. They just care about identifying safety issues, like what parts of this can happen again. And so they're not like an alien investigation agency or anything. They're not going to be out there looking for UFOs unless they generally believed at the time, like, hey, there's a persistence in this area of anomalous aircraft that bringing an aircraft down at. This thing needs to be put in aviation hazard so that we can avoid it. The spatial orientation, like I said, it's not like a new thing, and it's been behind quite known crashes that like essentially did the ruling of the National Transportation Safety Board, investigative agencies. The John F. Kennedy Jr. plane crash in 1999, crashes into the Atlantic Ocean, spatial disorientation. Eastern Airlines Flight 401, 1972, crashes into the Florida Everglades, loss of spatial awareness, didn't know their altitude. And that's just a couple. There's been a ton of these things. Oh, all right. The involvement of a military aircraft. So this compelling theory hadn't died for good reasons, because it could be true. In the late 1970s, various governments, particularly during the Cold War era, were testing it all kinds of advanced aircrafts. I mean, you have things like, I think you don't know exactly the years, but you have like develop things like the Blackbird SR-71, the stealth bomber, different types of like high altitude weather balloons, and all these things that pretty much any country around the world thought might give them the edge over Russia or China, who they're fighting with at the time in the Cold War. Or I guess they were fighting, they were writing angry letters. Of course, that's what I picture. Because of this, what happens, you have military aircraft protected under national security kind of legislation. And from time to time, there is civilian aircraft has an incident with like a UAP that falls under that category of like protected for national security. You're going to see a shitty investigation. We're not going to find out the answers because it's national security. And at the end of it, like, if it was an enemy that shot it down, we're not going to know. If it was aliens and the military knows, we're not going to know. I just want to point out that if there was military exercises going on in the area, Frederick likely would have been aware. Those exercises are reported as notices to airmen in the area so that they avoid wandering into, say, a training exercise or something like that. I definitely get the sinking feeling that there had to be some kind of military involvement in this, one level or the other. Even the fact that they're investigating the UAP incident might be enough for them to hold information back. Think about it. The reality is we're never going to know. And I like to think maybe he's still alive. Maybe he's chilling down there under some Australian base, being tucked away by the military, smoking a bong in Pine Gap and eating some lamingtons. I don't know. If you are, send us an email, dude. Let us know what's up. Promise I'm not going to tell the military. Okay, let's move on to this next theory. That Frederick actually made this whole thing up and disappeared himself deliberately, kind of like a D.B. Cooper. And in a calculated way, planned out this whole thing to kind of give himself like a bit of legacy, a cool story, have his name in the newspaper, be known for something.
So with the self-directed disappearance theory, there's kind of two avenues, and one being that he deliberately ends his life, and then the other one being that he fakes the end of his life so that he can kind of go on and start over fresh. So there's a lot of counter arguments that work against this, but mainly he was super close with his family, had tight relationships. He didn't leave any signs of him leaving. Like, there was no notes. He didn't clean out his belongings. There's really nothing but speculation that could tie to him faking his own death.
You never know. Seriously, I'll say this, you can't predict humans. So yeah, of course you could have did it. I don't think you did, but...
And there's so many unanswered questions in this case. And unless his aircraft is accidentally found someday, we're not going to get the answers. Can make up a million what ifs. This next one is actually one of my favorite ones. It's that he actually went through some kind of time slip. And there's more of these sci-fi theories out there. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but UAPs and UFOs are able to kind of alter time and slip through dimensions. And from time to time, in places like the Bermuda Triangle, when they're exiting and entering our space, they create a wormhole and people can get sucked into essentially another dimension. So maybe as Frederick approached the flashing lights, the hovering object in the sky, perhaps the very light outside the aircraft started to flash as the atmosphere disappeared, giving way to a tear in the fabric of the universe. Frederick waking up unaware in a completely different version of our reality. Me, it's just something interesting to think about, and maybe it allows me to put a positive spin on it in my brain where he actually gets to still be alive. But I hope he finds peace. I hope his family found peace, and I just want to say thank you for joining us again today. And I hope to be back in 2 weeks' time